Welcome to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. How do we learn to truly thrive together? How do we stay connected to our authentic selves, each other, and our purpose as a team, especially when challenged? How do we unlock the deeper levels of group intelligence? Enjoy this episode of the Connected Teamwork Podcast and learn practical tools to evolve the connectedness of your team to its next level.
Welcome to the Connected Teamwork Podcast, where we help leaders and teams connect more deeply to themselves, each other, and their purpose. I'm your host, Hylke Faber, here together with my co-host, Carson. Heady, Carson, how are you today?
I'm well, Hylke, and I appreciate you giving that context before you just jumped right in.
That's what we're going to talk about today. Practice number 4 of the Connected Communication Practices. Connect before sharing context and content. As opposed to what our crocodilian reptilian brain or ego wants to do, just nosedive in and forget there's anybody else with us in the room. In other words, tunnel vision conversations. So think about for a second about the conversations you've been in the last week. Ask yourself, on a scale from 1 to 10, how connected were you to the person that you talked to? 1. Second question, how curious were you about the other person's perspective? Or did you know that sort of was kind of a foregone conclusion? We're going to do this, and I just have to sit through this meeting and tell them what I think it is. So often we answer these questions somewhere below 10, or maybe closer to 1. And that's what this practice is about. Connect before sharing context and content. And let me explain that a little bit. Connect doesn't have to be like a big thing. It can be simply as, hey, Carson, how are you today? Carson, how are you today?
I'm well, Hylke. How are you?
I am well, and it's really good to see you. Now we're remembering that we're 2 human beings. My brain needs that, and maybe the other person's brain needs that too, because we get so focused on the task that it just can escape our attention that there's somebody else in the room. Now, Carson, I want to talk to you about connected communication practice number 4. Would you be open to have a conversation about that today?
Absolutely. That sounds great. Tell me more.
That is this. There you go. That's setting the context, and that's important too, because we might be so full of having this conversation. Like, I need to talk to you about this practice, or about this budget proposal, about this project, or about this client feedback. Well, the other person likely is going to be thinking about something entirely different. So how do we meet the minds and meet the hearts, have the hearts and the minds meet? How do we do that? I often think about it as this way. Like, I go to somebody's houses for dinner, I think, right? And I open the door and my friend says, great, I'm so glad you came to help me fix my car. And now I am in the garage with them, and I wasn't dressed for this. So the same thing happens with setting context. When we set context, we say, this is what I'd like to talk to you about. And are you willing, make a micro agreement? Are you willing to have this conversation? And then we go into the content. So then we talk about this practice. So Carson, I think about this practice as connect before sharing context and content. Let me ask you, Carson, which of those 3 C's comes most easy to you?
Connect.
Tell me more.
Connect, because I feel that we are hardwired for connection. I think for the most part, people don't listen to the content until they feel connection. And so while the agenda is important to you, connection is important to the other person that ideally you're looking to resonate with. And so if people aren't feeling seen in any given circumstance, they're not going to hear what you're saying. That's why I feel connection is paramount.
See, I think that's so true. Maya Angelou said something, people remember how you made them feel, right? And, in a business context, it can be so easy to ignore feelings. Now, we're not the therapy group either, but just, to me, it's about being able to honor each other. Like, because that also creates space, right? If we now, after we've connected and we're remembering that we are connected human beings, maybe even friends, then it gets us to the same side of the table energetically. And then if we have a disagreement, the disagreement exists also next to our connection. So there's a lot of space around the disagreement, as opposed to I have Carson is my disagreement. No, Carson is my friend, and I have a disagreement with him. That creates space. So, Carson, what do you do to create connection? Because you speak to so many people and connect with so many people in a day. What do you do?
I think one of the most important elements is realizing why, coming out of the gate, the connection is so important. I think connection creates permission, as you just really showcased with how you set the context for a meeting. It isn't as commonplace as we would want it to be. And I will admit, early on as a leader, years ago, decades ago, I was working in a culture where it was very business and metric driven. And so there was a lot of pressure. And I think the pressure will sometimes dictate how we show up. And we can't let it, because connection is what actually earns the right to move into that content and context. The content's important. The context is important, but the connection is paramount. Because when people feel seen and met where they are in that moment, and they feel respected, that's when they're truly going to open their minds, open-minded to the content and the context, but also bringing their best selves because they actually feel like they're being valued in that conversation. Trust is the price of admission for meaningful conversation. So when I approach a dialogue, I do think it's important. And again, I'm cognizant that we're in an environment where a lot of times we're running back to back in meetings, because what technology and this digital landscape can do. We do a lot of remote work, but I do think that it still makes it all the more important that we're, if there is an agenda that we want to pre-populate, that's great. But I also think, as we meet people where they are, that we don't just jump right into the business. We check in from a personal perspective, because sometimes that may completely flip the conversation. If there is something more pressing to speak about from a personal standpoint. And then finally, understanding, are there areas that you're looking to uncover or emerge from this call with? Understanding right off the bat when I'm talking to someone, what's a successful outcome of this meeting for them? And if I can do those things, respectfully setting context, but really meeting them where they are, understanding how they are personally as a human being, and then also making sure that I uncover what their outcomes that they want to achieve are, so that I can work to deliver that. Those types of things are table stakes for me.
Table stakes. I think that's such a powerful way to think about it, because when we're sitting at the table together, there's a flow that starts to happen, and then it doesn't feel as laborious either. Like just the difference. Think about conversations. I've been in conversations where I don't create that connection first, and it feels like laborious and almost much more like a high wire act, because I'm not built on anything. There's no foundation. And if I have that connection, there's a sense of, oh, we're in this together. And even if what comes up is not perfect, or you may disagree, or whatever's happening, there's something to fall back onto, and it's the foundation. The second thing that I'm starting to notice, I'm in my, I was going to say early 50s, but getting towards my middle 50s. It's funny how that happens.
You wear it well.
Oh, thank you. And my teacher asked me, because I was thinking about retirement. I don't think I ever retire, because I love what I do. And then I thought about, well, what is it about what I do, which of course is coaching and so on, that I love so much. And in part, of course, it is the work of coaching. But when I really think about, a big part of that is really being side by side with other people. Like, I had a conversation on Thursday evening with a client, leader of a technology company in India. And we haven't done like a project together in the last 12 months. But it is such a joy to connect together. And then in that connection, maybe we'll do another project together at some point, and maybe we won't, and that's fine. That is totally fine, because there's a sense of fulfillment that comes with that. When I come to the last few breaths of this life, people always say they think like, you think they're probably not going to think I wish I spent more time in the office. I think I'm going to think, maybe had I connected even more with people. And whether that's at work, quote unquote, which to me is an artificial boundary, or at home or wherever, it's the same. So to me, connection also creates a sense of purpose and meaning. Yeah. How is that for you, Carson?
As always, I think you summarize things very well as far as how we can strive to show up. And I realize as I work to become a better communicator, how much of it really falls into listening. I think sometimes as leaders, our default is to rush into giving that feedback, right? Because we've been planning it in our mind, or to jump into that correction or that constructive guidance, or giving direction. But if we rush to do that, it can often create defensiveness. I always try to play back how I felt in those moments too. And I realize whether it's a personal connection or even a business connection, or sometimes they are both, I realize sometimes, whereas my default in conversations like that might have been my desire or goal to be seen. And as I enter conversations like that today, my focus is now more on seeing others, because I find that the deposits, the investments that I make into relationships, those are what pay dividends. Because when people feel seen, when people feel acknowledged right out of the gate, or you're rewarding them with curiosity, those types of things, that's what I think pays dividends in the relationships. And I've seen that bear fruit, even just in my personal life, in relationships that are important to me. So, I think if you strive to connect first, you unlock better outcomes anyway. People accept feedback and constructive guidance better when they feel respected as well. And leadership communication always starts with empathy. And you're not going to get there if you come in focused on your own agenda. The reason we do that is often because of different pressures, maybe pressures that we feel, or pressures that we're putting on ourselves. But I think if we show up, more eager to seek connection as opposed to seeking outcomes right out of the gate, the outcome will be beget by the connection.
It's very clear. And I'm thinking about a difficult conversation that I have coming up later this afternoon. And it's with a team member who, in my eyes, is a few things that they need to do a little differently. And I'm not happy, it's a euphemism. I'm not happy with the results. There you go. When I think about that conversation without connection, it becomes a battle where I have to give them this tough feedback, and then I have to somehow make us get to the right outcome. And it's so much work in my mind, right? Because I have to prepare all this, and I like preparation, but it seems like I'm trying to control the uncontrollable. I'm trying to control this person, what they're going to do. If I think about connecting with them first, and not sidestepping the content, but connecting with them first, then there's a higher intelligence in me that comes online, because I start to see them as a partner, not as an adversary. I start to see them as a person that has done a lot of great things. So I don't just focus on this transactional thing that needs to change, like somebody's not a red scorecard. They just have something on the scorecard that's red, and maybe many things the scorecards are red, but they are not that. They are a person. And then that gives me the wherewithal to also have more of a conversation that's more about firm accountability and also coaching and helping them and together figure out what we're going to do about this, right? As opposed to me coming in with all the pre-cooked answers. We're going to take a short break. After the break, I want to explore more with you how we set context in a way, especially in difficult conversations, in a way that gives people the option to opt in. How do we do that? See you after the break.
You are listening to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Do you want to learn more about building the next level of connectedness in your team? Please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back, Connected Teamwork Podcast. We're talking about connection before context, before content, connected communication practice number 4. So we're going to talk about context now, setting a context that is inviting and helps people to opt in. And one thing that I've noticed is that we tend to do 2 things or 3 things. A, we don't set a context at all. Just dive right into the content. B is we talk about the context without stopping. So we just go right in. I want to talk to you about Connected Teamwork practice number 4. What do you think about that practice? But you haven't opted in yet. Forgetting the signature in the middle. Like we haven't contracted for this conversation. And then the third issue I've noticed is that we tend to go on for a long time. I want to talk to you about this because And I think we do that because we're insecure, because we are not quite ready to open ourselves to the uncertainty of having to deal with whatever the other person might think. So Carson, what do you think about setting a powerful context?
You said something earlier, Hylke, that really resonated with me, which was, how often we can approach these situations with a tunnel vision. Because, and frankly as well, I think it's important to point out that sometimes these, the foundation for these conversations is set before the meeting happens. Ideally, if we're giving a course correction to a colleague or a direct report, as an example, there's foundation that's built into the relationship where, we have a history of making positive deposits in that relationship. We've built trust, we've built credibility, we've been transparent leading up to that point. We're not just surprising them with information. And because those are the types of things that are of critical importance. Transparency lowers defensiveness. Those are the types of things we want to avoid in these types of conversations. Clarity can create psychological safety in these conversations because it's when people, I think, feel surprised or cornered, that's when they get defensive or that's when they resist. So kind of how you framed it up before, hey, I'd really like to spend some time, a few minutes talking about how we can improve X. That gives them the opportunity to realize, hey, this is the outcome we're looking to drive toward. And I have a little bit of latitude in how I construct my response. I'm not being proverbially boxed into a corner. I'm also a big proponent. I love the from to examples, right? So instead of saying, hey, we need to talk about this, trying, hey, would you be open to discussing this topic? Because if you make the invitation, that requires partnership. That creates this feeling of, hey, we're going to collaborate on this, as opposed to, Hylke's just throwing me into this situation where I really don't have much say. Because the moment that somebody feels forced to go down a very finite path, that's when their mind is going to close to the possibilities. If you have opt-in language, it turns the conversation into collaboration.
Yeah, because then we both are signing up to have a good conversation, right? As opposed to, I'm going to do this conversation to you. The word conversation comes from Latin conversar, which I've talked about before, which means turning together, right? And one of the beautiful things about humans is when we are in a conversation together, we learn things, we change. Conversations can be very healing, they can be very creative, they can create clarity, they create new possibilities. It's amazing when it's basically because what a conversation is we bring two minds or more minds together. And I love the little story of the blind men or women and the elephant. One is asked by standing by the tusk, what's an elephant? It's like a knife. The person standing by the leg says, oh, it's like a pole. The one says standing by the belly says it's like a ceiling. Who's right? Well, they're all right. And yet to take that jump, like why did I come up with that story many years ago, right? Because I think humans, we are very insular in some way. So then we do connect and then the context. And when we share context, I think it's important to give the person the freedom to also opt out. Not forever, right? Because if it's a performance conversation, are you willing to have this conversation right now? Nah, doesn't mean we're just going to postpone until the cows come home for next year. Okay, so when can we have the conversation? That's it. So there is some firmness in there, but it can be that person is like in the middle of a divorce, or they just had a difficult health message, or they just came from a very hard. This might not be the time. So that's connect before context, before content. The other thing about context that I want to share is that to use the word I want to talk to you about this, as opposed to let's talk about. Like when we it's like coercive language. And so when I think about the difficult conversation I need to have this afternoon, I'm going to talk to my colleague and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. Are you willing to talk about that? What do you think that does, Carson?
That's the invitation. That's the opt-in, opt-out. I as you were summarizing this, Hylke, I almost saw like this sequential process. You start with the connection, then you go to the context, then there's almost this invitation before you get to the content. And even acknowledging, hey, this is the outcome that we are working toward. Let's talk about how we can improve our process together around X. Would you be open to exploring that conversation? Once you've done that, you've created this safe entry into that conversation. That's what you're doing. You're offering this invitation with that opt-in, opt-out. And then if there are any barriers to going into the content, they will raise it at that time. But you've made it as smooth as possible by making that line. I think connection opens the door. The context will explain the room that we're going in, ideally together. And then the invitation lets people choose whether or not they're going to walk in.
Brilliant. So the connection opens the door. The context explains the room we're going to go into. And then in the content, we're entering the room. Then in that way, setting context is an act of care. Like I care about you in this conversation, and you doing well in this conversation. It's not like, the room we're going to go into is an ice skating rink. Oops, but I didn't tell you. So you didn't bring your ice skates. Well, too bad. You're going to be flailing. But I brought my ice skates. So you can that's the same as going into a conversation with somebody about a conflict or a performance issue or something else that's hard without letting people know before. Because then they can maybe spend some time to regulate. It's like, oh, well, Carson wants to talk to me about how we're working together and an issue he has. Okay. Now I, as a recipient, gives me the chance to think, okay, all right, I've been in feedback conversations before. Okay. How will I show up at my best? Gives me a sense to self-regulate as opposed to immediately being in the reactive dance with you. So what would you say to somebody, Carson, who says, I just don't have time. I just have so many meetings, so many topics. I do not have time to do connect, context, content. What would you say to them?
Do you agree that this outcome is important? I want to understand how they view what I view as the desired outcome, how they view that in their priority pecking order. Because I've been in situations like that where, people will say, hey, I've got all these other things going on. But what that tells me immediately is that they don't see what I've outlined as a priority for whatever reason. So I've got some work to do. I've got to make sure that I can effectively communicate why it's important, make sure that the invitation, as it were, is a little bit more enticing. But furthermore, they have to see the outcome that we're building toward and the processes that we are mutually working on together as foundational to our mutual success. I don't want to dismiss that perspective, but I've absolutely had folks that have said, they've pushed back on, specific meetings, or, maybe where I've gotten an earful from a member of my team about the performance of someone else. And then I show up with this other person and I'm armed with all of this intel, but I don't know this person's perspective. And so I need to make it all make sense and say, hey, I really would love to get your perspective on, the collaboration of our team, how we're working with our colleagues and our connected team. And if I get any pushback, hey, I don't really have time for that this week. I understand that, prioritization is paramount, and I'm getting some signals from the team that maybe there's some things slipping through the cracks, and I'd love to get your perspective and your feedback on how we can collectively do better. I think the way that you've got to focus as a leader is that it never comes across as an indictment. You don't want it to appear unsafe for them to engage in that conversation. So I've got to realize that, hey, at this moment, they don't see this conversation as a priority. How can I make it come across more as a priority? And how can I also ease the perceived burden of entering the conversation?
I love it. For easing the perceived burden, another way to think about that is, if you put our brains in an electroencephalograph, you'll see brainwaves, frequencies, right? And when we think fast, we're often less clear, less empathetic, less insightful, more confused. And when our brainwaves start to sort of slow down, we become wiser, more empathetic, more purposeful. And so when we do connect before context, before content, we transmit that it's safe to get out of fast brain thinking and to relax. And let's take a look at this again. It's like, let's take a walk in the woods and not talk about this, as opposed to, let's quickly squeeze this in because it's so stressful. And if you don't have time, then I would ask myself, who is not having time? Is that my higher self, or is that my ego fighting for some kind of short-term thing that somehow is absolutely life and death important, which it usually is not? Carson, final thought from you.
If you have connection established first, the context becomes much clearer and the content becomes easier to hear. It gives the conversation more of a chance to succeed.
Thank you. Oxygenate the conversation. Slow down. Connect, context, content. You've been listening to Connected Teamwork Podcast with Carson, Heady, Hylke, Faber. We'll see you next time at the Connected Teamwork Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Take a moment to reflect on what you learned today that can help build your team. Also, if you like, think about one of your team members and what you appreciate about them. Let them know. Enjoy connecting more deeply to what is great about them. And see you next time at the Connected Teamwork Podcast.